Please put your questions in the chat during the talk. If Lilli, of course, opens up for questions, please do unmute or apologies. But for the rest, please put them in the chat. Mute yourself during the talk, and we will also have a short end of the talk poll. So please fill that out. It will help us to improve for the next times. Okay. Just to quickly introduce MadeFor and we ourselves as a host. So my name is Agnes Spona. I'm managing director of MadeFor, and MadeFor is a learning organization that basically we build learning experiences to develop people's long-term skills. I see that picture went on top of long-term skills and change behaviors. So we do in general 3 things. We help to understand for organizations what capabilities you really need to deliver great customer experience. We also help build various learning experiences for you and with you as a business, and we also provide off-the-shelf specialized and immersive learning. If you want to know more, you can just scan the QR code on the screen, and this will direct you to our website, and we're always here as well to answer any questions. But for the rest, we are really, really happy to host this MadeFor Talk. We do this every month, and this month we have dedicated it to service design, and I assume you all are very keen to learn more about this booming and growing discipline. And today we have amazing Lilli Graf, who is service designer, innovation coach, and facilitator, to talk a little bit more about the future-proofing your design skills and how to prepare for a changing world. And I think this topic is on everyone's mind, very, very actual and important, and also in personal level. But I think if you think about the teams and organizations, also very, very important. So a little bit more about Lilli. So Lilli has been working in the innovation space for 12 years. Currently working as a freelance service designer and founder of IMMA, a collective of impact makers and experts working in the field of climate adaptation. Having spent the last 6 years working for top-tier design agencies such as Livework and Idean, hopefully I pronounced it correctly, she developed skills in systems thinking, service design, behavioral science, and business design. She continues to hone these skills through her consultancy practice as she works on complex and strategic problems for private and public organizations across Europe. So Lilli, the floor is yours, and please be welcomed.
Yeah, thank you all for being here. And I definitely could say that by actually being here and spending some time thinking about the future skills, you're actually already future-proofing your design career in that space. I'm going to share my screen with you and take you through the talk. Just give me a second. Cool. So you should all see this now. Right. Oh, so welcome. I'll add a couple of more things. So how you can get the most out of this session. Just set up your environment so that you can be fully present. So close maybe any tabs, Slack notifications that could distract you. We will need the phone like during the talk and also after, because I prepared a couple of interactive moments for us. Another thing is I have the chat open. So if something resonates with you, and sometimes I even will invite you, just type a +1 in the chat, as well as any questions you might have that we can come back. And last but not least, I've packed a lot of resources in this talk. Don't worry, you don't need to take extensive notes. We will share a list of all the resources that are useful after this talk. So yeah, as Agnes already presented myself, I'll do it really shortly. I'll give you a little bit of more background. I'm a mountain girl at heart. I grew up in a remote farm on the Italian Alps. And to go to school, I would wear a head torch and cross the forest. And when you grow up in nature and everything you do really depends on nature, it's something that is really close to your heart. And so that's also when I decided that I would go freelancing during the pandemic because it would allow me to work on challenges that I find most meaningful. And because I have the privilege, I felt an obligation to actually design for a better future. And that's also why I really spend a lot of time exploring the climate space and then finding my passion in climate adaptation. And I'll talk more about what that is later. And now I decided that alone I can't have that big of an impact. I actually probably need to create something bigger to scale that impact. And that is actually IMMA. And what is IMMA? At IMMA, my idea is really to bring together a collective of experts that could go from business continuity to emergency management, all really focusing on how we can help organizations prepare and adapt for the consequences of climate change. And to give you a kind of really concrete examples of, we recently worked with a few students on thinking on the brief of how we can prepare people for extreme weather events. Because one of the things that we understood is nobody really cares and nobody really prepares, but it is really crucial. And so how can we make that engaging by using comedy or even games to actually help us do that? And so this has been one of the projects, but there are more. So what's the premise of this talk? Whoever you are and wherever you live and whatever you care about, to some extent, everything has been affected by climate change and will be affected. And this is the world we currently live in and will live in the next period. And some even call this, because we like sometimes to go a bit in the doom and gloom aspect, the age of the permacrisis, which is actually have been nominated by Collins Dictionary, the word of this year, because through the pandemic and the geopolitical conflicts, as well as inflation and the cost of living crisis, we have seen over the last years this extended period of instability and insecurity. And let me know with the +1 if you think as well we live in an era of permacrisis, or if it's actually something else, or if this is also your perception. So what does this mean for us? It actually means that, that we arrived at the time where we actually need to start adapting for the consequences of climate change. Because even if we would stop all emissions and basically be net zero today, for decades to come, we will see the impact. And the impact are really have wide ramification. And the privileged global north has actually been quite immune for some time, and we are waking up to this now. And so this is actually a big challenge for all of us designers to actually think about how we can prepare for this. And as designers, what we do, we mostly design for people. And I want to give you an example and bring this to life of what this actually means and how big this is by taking the example of, think about Karima. And Karima is a woman who lives, let's say, here in Verona, where I live. And if Karima will think about what can she do for climate mitigation, which is actually addressing the root cause and thinking about how can we avoid emissions, then how would this affect a couple of aspects of her life? So one would be, if it's about her home, it would be about how can she make her home more green? How can she lower emissions by switching to renewable energy providers, or actually insulating her home, or recycling? If she might think about how could she use her job in, I don't know, operations to actually contribute to achieving net zero for her company, or even switch jobs. She might think about how she could invest sustainably and choose a bank or pension provider that invests sustainably and ethically. And sometimes she might feel shame and guilt when she makes a choice which is not, could be more sustainable. So buying a flight or getting fast fashion. But let's imagine that Karima thinks about climate adaptation, so how to deal with the consequences about climate change. Then Karima might think about how can she prepare her home for the impact of extreme weather events. And even if we're not in a flood-prone area in Verona, many homes start in the ground floors to have barriers against flash floods. She might think about in the future where also like her work security is not that so certain. What can she do to diversify income streams? She might think about how can she actually build a financial safety net so that she's more financially resilient in cases she might lose her job or her employer might be affected. And sometimes she might experience fear and grief for what's been lost and what will be lost. And so you can see that already this is quite different, the needs and the services and product what you design. And it gets even more different if we would have a look and imagine that Karima is actually living, for example, in Pakistan, where 1/3 of the country is actually been underwater. So Karima might think about, should I even know her home got destroyed? Should I rebuild this? Or should we actually move to a safer place? How can we get an income that survives when most of the businesses in our region actually have been affected by the extreme floods? She might really struggle to make ends meet and find the money that she needs to buy the minimum. And so what she actually probably experiences is an existential fear of like, how can I survive? And so you can see that Karima in different scenarios and trying to achieve different things has completely different needs. And so designing services or products in this era means something very different. And this is where actually the power of design can come in. Because I think as designers, if we start thinking of this and we start designing for this, we can make a huge impact, because we might we might not be able to avoid the huge impact that the climate crisis will bring with us, but we can definitely shape how we respond to it, how we prepare for it. And that's why I'm so passionate about it, because I think that the time to design better future is now, and that we need to do it. And that when we see a lot of doom and gloom messages in the media, we need to recognize that those messages go viral. And as long as media is measured in likes and shares, of course, we will hear much more about the negatives. But there is plenty of positive and solutions out there that we can put into practice. And so this is actually where I want to remind myself that whatever you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And this has also been shown by a study from Futera and Ipsos, that we should really think about how can we have an optimistic view about what we can change. And so what do we need? We need a revolution and we need an evolution of our design practice. Because if we are taking action, even in the smallest sense, we can transform what might be our fear into hope. And so what this means is, yeah, if you're privileged like me and you can afford to say, yes, I'm quitting my job and I'm really dedicating my career to this, then that's great. But I think that whatever job you can have a huge impact. And also, if I think of one of the most recent projects that I spent most time this year on, was actually designing a value proposition around financial resilience. And so how can we build this financial safety net for people? And nobody ever claimed that this was a climate adaptation project. And so I think this is really something, much of our work might never have the label of climate on it. But if we have the right skills to actually bring that into our practice, we actually can do climate work from no matter where position we are. So yeah. Thank you, Sydney, for sharing that quote. It's a great one. So what I want you to do, let's get a bit interactive and also see where you feel you can contribute. So you can use your phone to scan this QR code. And I'll take you here. And also, if you haven't scanned, you probably go and on your phone and you see the ciao, and there you basically can start. I can see how many we have, like 30 people. Otherwise, if you can't scan the QR code, you can just go to ahaslides.com and type in the code that you can see on the screen here. Cool. I think we have more people who join. I'll wait one more minute. Cool. Let's start. So I'm asking you, so the first question is like, how would you describe this changing world in one word? Uncertain. Yeah, we have challenging. It's also exhausting. It definitely has it takes a toll on our mental and physical energy. Sometimes hopelessness, definitely. Scary. Yeah, I think there are definitely a lot of more negative emotions than I see positive ones. I think that's also a bit like how we are depicting. I don't see it's like totally like positive. Sometimes it can feel, and I will come to that. I also see some hopeful in there. Definitely the complexity. And so I think also the skills that we need to navigate such a world are a bit different to the ones that we had for now in a more stable world. Thank you so much for sharing this. I would move on the next question, and I'm just curious for us also to see all together is like, what are 2 areas of your life that you perceive as most affected by the changing world? And yeah, you probably see a lot of things more in the environment, but definitely it has, we can see like now the mental and physical health, what it does to us. And I think depending on where we are, no, it really depends. We can see definitely the effects. I recently was in Switzerland to teach, and you could see all the trees that were brown. Yeah, definitely finances and professional go hand in hand, because usually most of us, we work to get actually the money, and those are linked. Thank you for sharing. Let's move on to the next one. Here it's like really open. What do you see need you feel to be more equipped to navigate the changing world and to contribute? Just to get a sense of what are the things that you think are really need to be in, I don't know, in your toolbox. Is it skills? Is it time? Is it money? Is it knowledge? Long-term view, definitely. Communication, support, networking. A rational headspace, collaboration, community, definitely. I think we're all in this together, and we can leverage our community much more, and actually will play an important role, as well as energy. Wisdom for riding the storm. Yeah, the job market not requiring lots of experience. I feel that there is a lot of space around knowledge, time and energy, and as well as community. Great. Green New Deal, adaptive resilience. Yeah. If you have more passion. Definitely a new economical system. I feel that we are going through an era of disruption, but that not necessarily needs to always be just negative. It could be also positive, because we've shown that capitalism doesn't really work. Great. I'll go on to the last question, because that leads us to the next chapter of this talk. And because some of you shared actually knowledge or skills, so, but even, yeah, adaptive resilience, what are skills that you feel that you need to feel more equipped? And what would you put on the list? Because I'll share my 5, but I'm sure that there are many more. And so I'm curious to see what it is, what you need. Motivation, peace of mind, curiosity, data and figures, yeah, definitely long-term thinking. Quite a few are really like about our perception of like how we manage things, how we deal with it. But also others, yeah, behavioral science, also the stats and the data and the figures, as you said, creativity, anti-fragility. Yeah, that's a great book. If you haven't read Anti-Fragile, it really shows you how actually our world is designed, or nature has a lot of things. What it means, for example, if you think you take a vaccine, really helps you introduce a little element of shock, but actually your system gets stronger. Or if it comes to forests, you might have small wildfires that clear out the forest and avoid big wildfires. So sometimes small negative effects actually can have a positive one. Wow, yeah, we have a lot of things on our plate, and I'm happy some of them we will touch on. I'll move on to the 5 skills, and thank you for contributing, and thank you for sharing what you think are a few things. And I'm sure that some of them we actually will touch on. Right. So I want to share the 5 skills that I selected for this talk today, that I think are really crucial. And I also want to say that there's many other important skills, also the ones that you have put up there, like system thinking or regenerative design or life-centered design, that are key for this next era and where we need to gain knowledge. But I chose the one really thinking about, if you think about the 3 scenarios that I presented, that focus more on adaptation. So how we really prepare and for the consequences of climate change. Because I feel that that topic has not been much in the limelight, except maybe for now COP27, where this actually finally was a major point on the agenda. So what are the 5 design skills that I want to talk about? 1, about envisioning possible futures, designing for unhappy paths, articulating the business value of our work, considering trauma in our practice, and fostering our own resilience. And I want to invite you to type in the chat the number of skill that you're most curious about, that you want to hear more about. So I get also a sense of if there is one that we want to kind of talk more, and one maybe less. And 3. Yeah. Okay, I'm trying to make like my stats and calculate everything right now directly here. But yeah, definitely for everyone, I give you a few more resources afterwards because it has been hard to condense so much into this one here. So let's start with the first one, envisioning possible futures. And Johanna Hoffmann, who wrote the book Speculative Futures, says it really nicely. When we get accustomed to the system we're living in, it's difficult to imagine alternative trajectories. And why is this so important? Because one of the things that we have is, the problems that we have is, Dave Karp wrote it in an analysis. When he looked at the visions of Silicon Valley and all the tech, it really, the hard part is that when we look at Web3 or artificial intelligence, of like how they imagine the future, they never account for the impact of climate change. So he calls it the blind spot of Silicon Valley. And another study that comes from PwC actually shared that 40% of CEOs only 40% are really considering climate risk, climate change in their risk mitigation strategies. This means that people who are making decisions are actually really unaware of what is coming and might come. And so our job as designers is actually to help prepare for the future. And to do that, we actually need to imagine what it could look like. And so here, one of the things that we can use is call it speculative design, call it future thinking. We need to actually help our organizations and our teams think about the possible futures. And I want to show what it means and how it's structured by using a diagram from Filippo Cutica, who is a designer who does a lot in this space. And so one of the first steps you want to do is think about what is currently happening. What are the trends that are impacting you or the business or the organization you're working in? And so you want to understand the change. And then the next thing that you want to do is actually explore possibilities. So the question you are going to answer collectively in a diverse group, ideally, is what we think could happen next. And here it's actually inviting people to not just go into kind of the dystopian or like pessimistic view or the optimistic view. It's actually what are the possibilities, and to really explore what this could mean for us. And we also don't want to imagine just one future. We want to imagine multiple futures. And what it actually helps us to then think about, what do we think we should do next? So we can think about what success looks like. How can we navigate this? And what is so powerful about this practice is that it builds and fosters our adaptive capacities. What do I mean by that? This activity gives us a sense of agency, the fact that we might feel we get more control over it. And by just imagining what it could be and what we could do, we feel more resilient, we feel more empowered, and we will be more successful when it comes to actually putting those in practice. Similar to what, if you're a service designer, similar to a blueprint, it's not the blueprint that is the value, but the activity of mapping the blueprint together, that it delivers the real value. And so when I speak to companies, one of the things that I hear from them, it's really hard for them to imagine what the future could look like. And so this is actually a great starting point for us. One of the first things that we should do to help them think about it. And I want to share with you the Futures Bazaar, which is actually a free open toolkit that Filippo Cutica and Stuart Candy made with the BBC, where you actually can have the whole manual, the slides, the printout, all the work that you can actually set up in your organization an afternoon and run this exercise. So you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You can try this out and see what happens if you actually give people permission to really imagine the future and the effect that it has also on our own perception of resilience. Similar to this first one, where we look into the future, designing for unhappy past is also an imagination practice. But it actually is a practice that I already did before. It's less about the future, but it's something very important, especially if we are going into an age of an era of disruption. And why is this so important? Because especially when I worked with startups and scale-ups, we really have this credo, move fast and break things. And we design for and optimize for the happy ending without really considering what could go wrong. And I want to bring this to life through a concrete recent example. We have a billionaire who bought Twitter. And that billionaire decided that he wants to make some money and make the verification check mark, the blue thing that really shows you which institution is official, for sale. So you didn't need to verify your identity to get one. And someone on the internet decided that they wanted to pretend they're a pharma company and announced that actually insulin is free for everybody from now on. And what happened is that the stock market really got angry in Eli Lilly, lost billions of dollars because of this. And if I think, could it be avoided? if there was actually a designer on this team? Potentially, yes, if we have run a consequence scanning workshop. And the consequence scanning workshop is, again, a practice, and you can use the free toolkit by .everyone. And we used that on a project a couple of years ago, where we developed a value proposition, and we had defined a bit what was the landing page and the high-level flow. And we wanted to actually look at what are positive consequences of our product, and what are potential negative unintended consequences. And so this was one example of where we really could look at what could go wrong. I hear a microphone. Does somebody want to ask a question, or is that, no, I think it's fine. So yeah, if you have your microphone, just please mute it. Yeah, so this is one way of how you can really think about what could go wrong. And especially if we need to design for emerging needs and come up with new solutions, this is a great way to assess what are potential negative consequences. The next tool that you could put into practice and is, if, for example, if you work much more in UX design or an interactive level where you really work on screens and flows. So, for example, me and Andrea Fischer, another colleague, a designer, we designed and created this unhappy path workshops. So we would go in different teams and actually together look at some data that we had before and think about what could go wrong, what are unhappy paths. So what would be potential disruptions? What would be barriers or dead ends for our customers? And we would go through the flows and see what are potential unhappy paths, what are the consequences for the users, and what could be potential solutions. And of course, you come up with a long list, and then you need to prioritize what you want to do. But why is this important? Because if you just think about with the increase of heat waves, or generally the World Meteorological Organization says that we will have 40% of more extreme weather events by 2030. What does it mean? That probably many of our services might have power cuts in the future. So how do you prepare for that? But how do you prepare also for other aspects that are could be potential negative? And so what this exercise helped us in this specific project to do is design a service that is more resilient. Because over the last decades, we really optimized for efficiency, but not for resilience. And so this actually helps us. And in our case, it even had positive impacts, because what happened is that we could show that we move our support service for this app or the service from being a very reactive support model of like people calling me when something is wrong to much more a proactive support model. And so what we actually could show that this has a huge economic benefit for the organization. And so they actually allowed us to spend more time on thinking about this unhappy path and design more proactively support within the service. And this leads us also to the next skill, no? Because we were able to do this work because we were able to articulate the business value of our work, especially if we want to move our organization in a different way of working and move away. We still need to take into account, as Emmanuel Machado says, that the reality is that decisions are made with data, and particularly with financial data. And so as long as we are in a capitalistic, capitalism is reigning and we can't move to another model, we need to know that businesses really think about how they can make more money and how they can make money more efficiently. And so this actually, we as designers are probably not really trained to think about what is the business value that we are delivering. And so one of the things, the starting point is actually making guesstimates. And I give you some concrete resources in the list. But for now, I want to give you a bit of an input of what could be the starting point for you. And the starting point, actually, Yanis here comes where I got an inspiration from Josh Nex. And see, he actually helped me to really think about whatever work you're doing, think about what is the value you're providing for the business. And think of it in using this quadrant. So think about, how can I actually help make money or save money? How can I actually help save time or do things faster? In terms of quantity, how can I actually make less of something that is undesirable? Thinking, for example, support calls. And how can I actually improve the quality of things and do something better? And if you really struggle to fill this out or think about it, the easiest thing and the best thing you do as a designer is you're good at asking questions. Go to your stakeholders and ask them how they measure success. How do they measure business value, so that you actually can think about it? And because in climate adaptation, many things are actually about prevention. So you actually need to flip this, and you need to think about what is the value lost if we are not doing anything. So you need to calculate the cost of inaction. And again, you can use this as a starting point. So what happens if we don't do something? And so once you have done this, it becomes really much easier to think about, what could be the numbers and the guesstimates that you add. Most businesses, when they make a business case, is actually creative accounting. And we are creatives, so probably also can do creative accounting. And in the resource list, you can actually get really concrete examples of how we build the prototype with numbers in one aspect. The fourth skill that I want to talk about, because we now convinced our stakeholders about the future because we made them imagine it and envision what it could look like and why they need to take action. And we got the money for it because we really were able to convince them. So now we can actually put our work into start working. And here, the next thing that will become very key is actually considering trauma in our practice. Right now, if you think before the pandemic, 2/3 of Europeans have actually lived through a traumatic event. And some say that actually through the pandemic, everybody of us to some extent has experienced trauma. And if we go, if you consider if we would need to design for Karima in Pakistan, then definitely we would need to take into account trauma. And so this is becoming really crucial for us. And it's a bit against the lean and the agile thing, because you can't move fast and break things when what you might break is people's mental health. And this is one of the things that we really should take into consideration. And unfortunately, and I'm absolutely guilty of that, our design practice is very transactional. And so what we usually do is that we're reaching out to people and ask them to join us for an interview. And during that interview, we might ask them about their personal experience and make them actually relive potentially their traumatic experience. And then we leave and we go back with our team and design solutions for them. And this is not really like a practice that considers trauma. And so we actually need, as Charlie Poticari said it recently in a conversation, and she is a designer specializing in inclusive design, we need to move into a caring co-creation. And so what this actually means is I can't summarize it with a checklist, because what it actually requires is a constant attention and the caring awareness and sensitivity to the people who we're designing for. And so what this means is actually that, first of all, we need to consider and create an environment that feels safe to them. So we also potentially need to have practices in place that help people to actually raise their hand very easily if they feel that if they want to report something. Right now, if you think a lot of digital products, you need to report something once the harm has happened. We need to change that. And so the other thing is we need to feel people empowered. We need to be aware of our privilege and the cultural differences, and actually really work, I think, generally on doing anti-racism work, so that we can make them feel validated and affirmed. we also need to be very clear and transparent about all the tasks. So what are we going to do and what is going to happen next, so that we are perceived as trustworthy, as reliable and competent. We want to give the people we are designing and involving in our design practice the choice. So for example, when we run this recent series of research, we wanted to really understand, some don't want to be involved in an interview or talk about it. They might prefer to write about it in an anonymous way. And can we make that happen and possible? And then it's really about creating a collaboration and designing with them and not for them. And I think that is really changing a bit, probably the methods and tools that we use, and thinking about how can we actually invite people into our practice more and more. So last but not least, I want to share the fifth skill, that the more I work in the space, the more it becomes important to me. And I see it's important. And especially as you saw how you feel about the world, there is a lot of negative emotions, and it's taxing on our mental energy. And I would like to invite you to type in a +1 if you know someone who needed to take a break from burnout in the last 2 years, since the beginning of the pandemic. And I'm sure, as you can see, we are many people. And so this becomes much more important than ever. And as Susan Moser says it really nicely, is burnt out people aren't equipped to serve a burning planet. And so the more I read and study, the more I came to this conclusion that how you feel about the climate crisis matters as much as what you do. And what do I mean by that is actually that Brené Lertzman and others who really work in the space, they understood that actually we need to create spaces, that safe spaces, and usually collective spaces that allow us to feel the feelings. And so in the resource that I will share with you, Kriti, and I can't remember her surname, she said something really beautiful. She says that we need to experience grief. Why? Because grief is real and grief is natural, and we have an obligation to feel it fully. Otherwise, we are going to take shallow action. But what is actually being called for is deeper. And we don't get deeper action if we don't make space for our grief. And so I think this is something I personally struggled quite a lot, because I actually thought I'm just going to do a lot of things. And I cope with my climate anxiety by becoming a human doing rather than a human being. And so what I did recently was actually joining a climate circle, which is a safe virtual space that allows you to just express the fears and the griefs and the emotions that you have. And I actually, when I joined it initially, I was like, what the hell am I doing here? I'm going to type that I need to leave early. I feel so uncomfortable because I really wasn't even able to put names to the words and to my fears. I wasn't able to express them. And then what I realized is by listening to others people's fears, that I actually finally found, and I could reflect myself, and they resonate with what others were experiencing. And so one of the other things that really stuck with me is actually a quote from Krista Tippett, and she made a beautiful episode on the long view of time. And so what she says is that if this is the work of the rest of our lifetimes, we must honor and protect space and time for staying well and staying whole. And so what I want to invite you is to really think for you personally, how can you give yourself permission to feel, and how can you take care of yourself? There's probably no recipe that works for everyone. Everyone has different strategies and tactics. For me, one of the things is actually having this kind of tiny hand, which is from Josué, the son of a dear friend of mine, and I keep it on my desk so that I'm reminded that what I do is actually probably not for my generation, but for the next generation. I also made this visual pyramid of recalibrating and reminding myself what are my priorities, and actually making and carving out space for movement and mindfulness, because otherwise I can't probably just continue, although I'm super passionate about it. But whenever every day that ends, you could just continue working because it's never done. And it took us generations to make this mess, and it probably will take us generations to get out of this mess. And so, yeah, we have a lot of work to do. But I hope that by giving you a bit of like a taster and also some practical tools and sharing some resources around those skills, you actually are able to think more in a different perspective around this. And so those are the 5 skills that I want to share with you. But I'm also curious to now do another short interactive exercise. And to explore a bit, what are the priorities? And then again, you can take basically your phone and scan the QR code. Wait, I'll also go here and present and show to you this so that we can So, the first question that I want to ask, right now that you saw those skills, which one do you think is the most important for you to navigate the changing world? Okay, yeah. I think, yeah, working on our own resilience and working on our own emotions is kind of, as a catalyst, and then helping probably organizations to envision what the future could hold. Okay. Great. And I want to think also, this is what you thought of important, but what would you like to work on first? Because I share a long list of resources. So this is more kind of setting your intention. If there is one area that you want to develop and learn or more about, what would that be? Yeah, also articulating. It's interesting, to see how what we think is important and how what we want to improve first is probably, yeah, it's quite different. Great. Now move on to the last. I think they are very close, but we have the thing. No, or if you're finished the sentence I'm interested in, if there is something that you're particularly interested that you want to share. I think one of the things that Daniela already shared, like how to discuss this further with practitioners or creating space. So one of the things we started very a bit like naturally is actually creating a lunch and learn on climate adaptation. So the next one is actually on the 16th December, and where we really dive into envisioning possible futures. So we would look at the first skill, and invite different people who share their experience of creating those scenarios and helping people to explore it. How to keep the conversation going? Yeah, so you're all free to join the next Lunch and Learn. We might add that to the list of resources so you can be involved. We usually, we also created real examples. Great. And also learning, you're right, MadeFor is doing a lot of learning. So that's probably also good input for you. So thank you so much. I mean, you can continue vote. I'm just also aware of time, and I want to we'll go and share the list of resources with you. I'll also invite you to the next Lunch and Learn if you really want to go deeper. If you want to connect, feel free to reach out. I'm always available mostly on LinkedIn, and there's also a website. So you can definitely read more. I just made a condensed version of all the work or aspects that I've been exploring over the last year in here. And one thing that I want to leave you with before we open to questions, because sometimes this can feel big and overwhelming. But I really liked what Margaret Mead, an American cultural anthropologist, said. And she said, never doubt that a small group of committed people can change the world. In fact, it's the only way it ever happened. And she actually just proved that by studying all the different movements that happened. And I think this is something that we should take away and just be a reminder of ourselves that we can do much more than we potentially think, and that some might even want us to think. So thank you. And we can have any last questions that you might have.
Thank you, Lilli. That was a great session. I see that there's a lot of people sharing the same sentiments. So anyone has a question that would like to unmute? We have only a couple of minutes left, and ask the question in voice. Otherwise, I will ask a question from the chat. Oh, everyone is shy. So we have a lot of +1, but so there was a question from Mauro. And so when you were talking about a blueprint and how blueprint is treated often in service design practice as a holy grail. So Mauro asked about stakeholders or humans in general need to have tangible outputs to attribute value to. Maybe that is why more and more people in the business attribute so much value to the blueprint itself. What would be your view on it?
Yeah, definitely. I think, probably when you do this, we talked it in the space about envisioning future scenarios, and you will probably have no future plans and what you can do. But it's actually, it's more the exercise in itself that is important. But of course, then people say, yes, we tick this off, we have a plan, but it's that plan on that future scenario is probably never going to happen exactly as we envisioned it. And so I think we also just need to be aware of that it's not about the outcome, although they might prefer that, but really about this exercise. So for example, even a go bag, like an emergency bag that you want for extreme cases, you shouldn't buy one. You should actually go through the exercise of building one, because it helps you to ask the question is like, what do I need? Do I need photocopies of my ID, my medications, my prescriptions? Where would you meet? And so it's similar to that. It's really about thinking through the scenarios.
Thank you, Mauro. Mauro is still on the call. I hope that answered the question. I don't want to run over time, but I think everyone is very, very inspired, and there are some additional resources also shared in the chat. I will make sure to collect all of that as well. We will share the recording and materials and links and everything in after the after the call. I believe that will be tomorrow. David, show me the thumbs up. Yes, that will be tomorrow. And again, I want to thank everyone for joining. Thank you for being so engaged as well and participating in. And I want to say big thanks to Lilli for this amazing session. So insightful and triggers a lot of thought, I think, for all of us. Thank you. Thanks, Elvin.
Thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time and joining and putting in. If there's any question that we didn't touch, we might just add that into the list of resources and answer there. So yeah, I'm happy to see you somewhere else and to connect.